Mahlon and Chilion. All right. So we are wrapping up the book of Ruth today. And last week we kind of saw a budding romance. And so we expect that that's kind of how it's going to go, except we have this opening of more of a legal proceeding sort of going on instead of romance. Boaz goes to the city gate, which is where a lot of legal transactions and that kind of business tended to happen. It's the ancient equivalent of the courthouse. And he gathers all the elders and waits for this other man to pass by who is a closer relative to Naomi's husband than Boaz is. So under Israel's law of family redemption, he has the first right to redeem Elimelech's property. And at first the arrangement sounds very appealing to this guy. He's like, ooh, I get more land. He's like, sure, I'll do that. And the man says, yeah, I'll redeem it. Good deal. And then Boaz goes, okay, little hitch. You also get the Moabite woman, Ruth. She's a widow, and therefore, to acquire her means to maintain that inheritance for that family. And suddenly, this man's mind changes. And he's like, oh, this is not such a good deal. I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Now, this sounds like a really strange kind of situation, right? How this would work. Of course, passing a woman off as part of a sale of property seems a little odd too, but we'll not go there. So why does the man not want to acquire Ruth in this transaction, and how would it affect his inheritance? Believe it or not, it actually has nothing to do with her being a Moabite, because a lot of times they're like, oh, well, he just didn't want to be with her because she was a Moabite. It really didn't have anything to do with that. It actually had to do with financial type of things. By redeeming the land, he has to invest his own money into it. He has to spend his own money to purchase that land, which, can be a good investment. Real estate, never go wrong, right? So if he married Ruth, though, and they had a son, that son would legally inherit that property, not as part of the Redeemer's family estate, but as the continuation of Mahlon's family. And even though it was biologically his child in the eyes of the laws of Israel, it would be Mahlon's child, not his. So he would spend his resources basically increasing someone else's inheritance, another family line's inheritance, while reducing what other children of his might have. So financially for him, this was a risky proposition. It complicated his estate, and so he decides he's not going to do it. He declines. He says, that's too much risk. Boaz, however, steps forward anyway, and he accepts the cost. He accepts the obligation. He accepts the risk that is involved in this, and redeems both the land and Ruth as well. And the elders respond with a remarkable blessing. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah. Now I want you to think about that for a moment, because she is a Moabite, right? And the Moabites were greatly despised. They were an enemy. She's a foreigner. She's someone whose people had long been viewed with suspicion and hostility. And yet, by the end of the story, the community isn't merely tolerating her living there. They are placing her alongside the matriarchs of Israel, Rachel and Leah. She who once stood outside the covenant community is now welcomed into its very heart. And this is saying something when you consider Moabites were strictly forbidden from even entering into the house of the Lord. And now she is being revered as one of, alongside the matriarchs. So after Ruth gives birth, the neighborhood women say to Naomi, a son has been born to Naomi. What? I mean, Ruth had the kid, right? How is this now Naomi's son? Well, because again, continuation of Elimelech and Naomi's line, not Boaz's. So it's easy to miss that Naomi is really the one whose story is coming full circle. Even though this book is called Ruth, it's also really about this woman, Naomi. Because the book opens with death and it ends with life. It opens with famine and it ends with abundance. It opens with emptiness and no hope. And it ends with a baby in Naomi's lap. New life, new beginnings, a new future. The women even tell her, "The Lord has not left you this day without a next of kin." Sometimes God's greatest gift is not changing our past, but it's giving us a future beyond what our grief could see. And then the narrator pulls the camera back one final time to show us kind of the implications of this act of Boaz, this act of generosity, this act of redemption. Obed becomes the father of Jesse. Jesse becomes the father of David. So this little family drama in Bethlehem turns out to be the beginning of Israel's greatest royal dynasty, right? But even that isn't the end of the story, because centuries later, there's another genealogy, and Ruth gets mentioned in it. It's Jesus, right? The genealogy of Jesus. And the gospel writers want us to notice something remarkable, that the Messiah comes from the line of a poor immigrant widow from Moab, a woman many would have dismissed, a woman some would have excluded, a woman who arrived with nothing but loyalty to her mother-in-law and faith. She becomes part of the very family through whom God saves the entire world. Now that's gospel, right? Because part of the gospel is that God delights in bringing the outsiders in. God delights in redeeming stories everyone else assumes is over. God delights in taking what looks empty and filling it with grace. In many ways, Boaz himself becomes a picture of Christ. The near Redeemer asks, "What will this cost me?" Boaz and Jesus ask, "What will it take to save them?" The nearer Redeemer declines because redemption threatens his inheritance. Jesus gives up heaven itself, taking the form of a servant and becoming obedient unto death, even death on a cross. And Boaz pays the price to redeem both Ruth and Naomi. And Jesus pays the price to redeem the entire world. Additionally, the man who refused redemption isn't even given a name, right? We don't know anything about the guy. The text simply calls him friend, because history forgets the one who protected his inheritance, right? That inheritance was so important that thousands of years later, we don't know anything about that guy. History, however, remembers the one who gave his away, because that too is the way of Christ. The cross is not God protecting what belongs to him. The cross is God giving himself away in love. Because Jesus chose redemption over self-preservation, every one of us who was once far off has been brought near. And like Ruth, we come with empty hands, right? Like Naomi, we often arrive carrying bitterness, carrying loss and grief. Like Boaz, Christ meets us at the place of our need and says, "I will redeem." So perhaps the final message of Ruth is this: the story that looks like it is ending may only be reaching the place where God begins writing redemption. I'm going to repeat that. The story that looks like it is ending may only be reaching that place where God begins writing redemption. What looks like an end is a beginning. The God who filled Naomi's empty arms, the God who welcomed Ruth the outsider, and the God who raised up David is the same God who, in and through Jesus Christ, has opened wide the gates of his kingdom and has invited all of us to come in. Confident that God acts on our behalf, I invite you to please rise as we pray for the church, for the world, and all those in need. God of